Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to the show. And on today's episode, we get the privilege of sitting down with my special guest, Megan. Megan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it is a privilege. It is an honor, and I'm excited to hear your story. Now, we know on this podcast, we will get into what's happening currently and your connections to OMF and how God's led you through that. But what we like to do is always go back to the beginning. So could you take us back to your childhood, growing up? What was God doing? How was he leading to you to that point of where you surrendered your life to him and all the other things that came afterwards that we'll get into? We'll go through that, but take us back.
Yeah, I think when I tell the story, it feels like one of those stories that this isn't a good way to start a story, by the way, saying, oh, it's not that exciting. But it's, I grew up in a Christian home in Pennsylvania. So my parents were both believers and involved in ministry since I was young. So I think I was, they took us to church every week. And I just remember wanting to know God from a young age. And I think that was just like God's grace in my life, that I had a lot of spiritual curiosity and interest. And so I really wanted to know that I was going to heaven and I wanted to please God. And I liked going to youth group and Bible studies and all of that. So I think, kind of the, I guess, somewhat unexciting beginnings, but I am really grateful for just the opportunities I had to learn and grow. But also, there was still a journey of figuring out what did it actually mean to follow God or to know Christ. I think I was very much a people pleaser and wanted to earn approval by just doing the right thing always. So that kind of filtered into my relationship with God, I think, because I was like, okay, here's what you do to please God, and you read your Bible and you pray. And I also really sort of had an evangelistic interest in me too from a young age. But my evangelism took the form of telling my friends that they shouldn't cuss and they shouldn't date boys that aren't Christians and they should do all the right things, and so
follow the rules.
Follow the rules, So I look back on that and I'm like, oh, my poor friends, who had basically the Bible thumper coming after them to make sure they were doing things right. But I think it was just, so that was something that I think God had to refine in me over time. And so really, I think as I got into probably more like college is when I really did have more questions. I was wrestling a little bit more, and also wrestling with, as I was coming up against disappointments or things that I had expected God to do in my life that he didn't do, then there was a little bit more of a wrestling for me of, okay, well, I grew up with this faith. Is this really what I believe? And is this really what I am committed to? And I also I think had a lot of pride because I felt like I was like a decently good person. And so I knew that the gospel was a matter of recognizing your need for God. And so I think, I just started realizing more and more that I didn't necessarily have this grief over my sin and a real recognition of my need for the Lord. So I think I just, started asking God to show me my sin more clearly, to show me my need for him more clearly. And so it was sometimes, I feel like I was sitting on like a bench in a Walmart parking lot or something. And for some reason
where most conversions happen. Yeah,
exactly. Yes. So for some reason, that was the moment that I remember of just suddenly being overcome with my, like, an understanding of my sin. And I just credit the Lord for just being faithful and answering those prayers of like, God, help me understand. And so, I think even though I feel like the Lord was really working in my life and I still had like a hunger to know him, I'm thankful that, he brought eventually a little bit more, I think, humility and understanding of the need for, my need for him as I got a little bit older. And so I think that was a point where I started really, maybe not started, but it just deepened my appreciation for Christ. And that kind of also coincided with my introduction to missions, which I don't know if I'm jumping into that now or not. But I think it's just been a journey with the Lord of understanding the gospel, what it really means, and also wrestling with even some of the, I think, conceptions about God that I somehow acquired in my growing up years of what it does mean to please the Lord, to know him, to follow him. Because I think growing up in a Christian environment, it can be, I don't know, easy to get into kind of a legalistic mindset. And so that's something I've kind of had to battle throughout my years of knowing the Lord.
So you didn't go to college to study like theology or ministry or something like that. Where'd you go to college? What was your focus?
Yeah, I went to James Madison University in Virginia, and I was English major. So I started out undecided and just ended up picking English because I liked reading and I liked my English classes in high school. So it wasn't a really strategic move career-wise. It was just like, I think this is the major I would enjoy the most. So, but I was involved at InterVarsity Christian Fellowship while I was there and was part of some small groups and Bible studies and stuff. So yeah, I did have some involvement in ministry, but it wasn't like my main focus necessarily. So
what year were you in when you had the Holy Spirit showed up at Walmart for you?
Yeah. I would say it might have been my junior year, possibly around there. Yeah.
Was there something happening in the years that led you to start going, wait a minute, maybe I'm not really fully surrendered yet?
Yeah. I don't know. I think it was just like, maybe it was just the dissonance and the incongruence I started feeling of, I really wanted to tell people about God, but I think I wanted to do it because it was like the right thing to do. And because I don't know, I did think Jesus was the way, but I recognized when I would tell people, I couldn't tell them from a place of like, here's how God rescued me and here's what he did for me and here's how grateful I am for his forgiveness. And I hear other people's testimonies and that would be part of their testimony. But I was like, I don't feel like that's part of my story necessarily. And I wanted it to be. So I think I just like knew that that was part of the deal. And I wanted to be able to share about Christ from an authentic place of recognizing my need for him. So I think it was just like the growing, kind of angst I felt with like, I don't like that there's this incongruence here. And so I think but it also was a really cool time to just see that like, if you need something from the Lord, just ask him for it. If you want him to change your heart, like he will. And so you can really just ask and he'll respond. And so I think that was a cool thing is like, I didn't have to do anything special. Like all I did was pray for understanding and he gave it to me. So I'm grateful for that.
So what changes? You're sitting on that bench, the Holy Spirit shows up. What changes from that moment moving forward?
I think it's kind of just like the gradual, I don't know. I don't know that it was like a huge, like my life is totally different after the fact necessarily, but I do think it was an important realization as the Lord. Well, I mean, and this is where I'm like, I don't know exactly how much longer after that came my introduction to unreached people, but I think it was important that those kind of coincided with one another because I think also at first, before that point, I had a hard time. I also know I had a hard time believing that Jesus was the way for all people. I also remember thinking like, okay, I feel like Jesus is the way for my friends because it makes sense to me. And I feel like I can tell my friends that Jesus is the way for them. But when it came to other cultures, I felt like, who am I to say that Hinduism or Buddhism or Islam isn't the way to God for them? Yeah. And so I think, it was important for me to both on a personal level realize, okay, Jesus is the one to offer us forgiveness and we all need that. But it also started coinciding with me hearing testimonies of people from other cultures, which was really at Urbana when I feel like I heard those testimonies, I don't know for the first time, but I remember it like that was the first time I heard it. And so, I think it was just important for me to have that personal conviction before God kind of opened my eyes to the global need for Christ. So,
What Urbana was that? Which Urbana?
2009.
And so you were graduating that year?
Yeah, I was a senior at JMU and it was, like 5 months or something before I was going to graduate. And I just went to Urbana because my friends were going, because I was part of Ivy InterVarsity. And so that was the InterVarsity conference to go to that year.
Yeah.
And my friends were going and they were interested in missions. I was not necessarily thinking about that for myself, but I was like, oh, a chance to hang out with my friends. So I guess I'll go, and wasn't expecting much out of it. But, it was pretty life-changing for me.
I was gonna say that must have been the event that changed your trajectory of everything in your life.
It did.
Because that's the year you went on a short-term trip, right? With
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go to that Urbana experience.
Yeah.
People who may not know about Urbana is probably one of the largest missions conference that happens every 3 years, but it has a college age focus, and it draws in students from all around the United States and Canada and probably all over the world to share about what God's doing all over the world in missions. Like you had said that word, unreached people groups. You don't even know if you even knew that term before Urbana.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to you walk into the big area, the big stage of Urbana. What happens?
There's a few things I remember from that conference. One was, hearing testimonies from people who had grown up with like a Hindu background or Buddhist background, and they were talking about their encounter with Christ and when they came to know him, and they just spoke of him with such love, and they just treasured him so deeply. And I think, that really expanded my understanding of God being this universal God. And it's not like I didn't know that, but I just didn't have a conviction about it necessarily. I was like, I've never traveled at that point. I think I had been on a short-term trip to Nicaragua as like a service trip. And that was my first time out of the country when I was in college. But that was my only time out of the country. And so I just was like, I haven't visited other parts of the world. Like, who am I to say that Jesus is going to have this kind of appeal for people from totally different religious backgrounds? So I think hearing those testimonies, I was like, oh, like Jesus really is a universal God. And when people encounter him, their lives change. So that really, that stuck with me. And then there was another session where I think they were talking more about the statistics of like unreached people and how, well, first of all, I don't even know that I realized that there were areas of the world that hadn't heard the gospel for even the first time. That was kind of news to me. And then they were saying that like something like 3% of only 3% of missionaries are going to unreached people, and the rest are going to areas where the gospel has already been preached. And I just was like, that's not okay. How is that happening? And I just was really bothered by that. And I was like, this can't be right. Like, how is this? So there was some sort of like justice element in me that was getting stirred up, that I was like, this can't be happening. So there was that. And then, but I still wasn't at that point thinking that it had really any implications for me personally. It was just a lot I was just holding on to and thinking about. And then I think, in between sessions there, you could go to the exhibit hall and meet different organizations. And I was not going to go walk around there because I was like, I'm about to graduate. I don't need to be going on like a missions trip right now. I'm not interested. But this, there's just this voice in the back of my head, which was really my mother's voice saying, just take advantage of the opportunity. You could say maybe it was the Holy Spirit, sounded a lot like my mom. And I was like, okay, fine. I'll just go and I'll just
talk to a couple. Was the voice similar to the one at Walmart?
It was a little different. This one,
okay.
It was slightly different. I'm like, this is something my mom would say, but maybe they were working in tandem with one another in that moment. Yeah. So, but I was like, I'm here. I guess I'll just go and walk through. And so I talked to, a couple organizations. Of course, they were like, we have opportunities for you to like, when they heard I was an English major, they're like, oh, you could teach English. And I was like, I don't want to do that, But then I think I talked to OMF because I was kind of like looking for a job in writing and editing. And I just was like, that doesn't intersect with missions really. So there's really no point in me talking to these people. But I walked by OMF's booth, and I think I just stopped for a second because credit to their communications team at the time. They had cool banners. And so they said clearly like love East Asia. And I was like, I don't know anything about East Asia, but I just thought their banners were cool. And so then as I'm lingering there, someone makes eye contact with me. And then suddenly I'm in a conversation. And, they were like, oh, what are you interested in? And I was like, I'm just a writer, English major. You probably don't have any opportunities for me, because at that point, again, I'd already been offered opportunities to teach English, which I didn't want to do. And, the person, I believe this was Aaron Kawai, started tearing up and said, we've been praying for writers to come talk to us. We can absolutely use you. And I was like, what? And they had an open position for a writer/editor on the team. And so then my interest was piqued, because I was like, job opportunity? Let's talk more about this. So even though I didn't have necessarily a career interest in missions at the time, I was still like, well, it's a ministry. I like ministry, might as well explore this. And so, yeah, that really started my connection with LMF. But I think it also aligned with the Lord just opening my eyes to unreached people and missions and the rest of the spiritual needs in the rest of the world. So LMF, they recommended that I go on a short-term trip with Serve program, to just kind of get my feet wet. Because I was like, okay, well, I'm interested. And they're like, okay, since you've never been to Asia, how about you go on a Serve trip just to see what you think? And then we'll talk.
Serve is our short-term ministry program. That's usually like 2 weeks up to a year, for those who don't know.
Yeah.
So you did that after you graduated, though, right?
Yes, after I graduated. And I don't know why I did not really, after that point, I just was like, let's see what happens with LMF. I should have been job hunting at that point once I graduated, looking into other opportunities, whatever. But I just was like, let's see what happens with LMF. So I was really just kind of honed in on, seeing what came of it. And so that summer after I graduated, I went on a Serve trip to Southeast Asia for 6 weeks, doing like ethnographic research, which was basically gathering information about the local communities to give to the missionaries so they could see what the different needs were in places where they hadn't yet started working. So that was my first time in Asia, and also my first time in a community that was predominantly of a different religion. And just talking with people, hearing their views of God, or really, really how they felt that they were committed to their faith, but they also felt very distant from God, and kind of shared, that they didn't feel that there was really a way to really know him, or to know that they were forgiven for their sins. And so just kind of hearing these like really wonderful, lovely people talk about just how they didn't know if they were forgiven by God, or if they could ever really know him deeply. And so that just broke my heart. And to see that there wasn't really a Christian community there that could share about Christ with them, or that they didn't really have access to the gospel message there. I think just being immersed in that kind of setting, it just made real to me that, that statistic of that however many people in the world don't have access to the gospel. I was like, oh, here are those people who haven't been told about God's forgiveness for them. So so I came back from that being like, I need to move to Asia right now. And really, I just was like, wanted to be in the middle of the act. I just was, but I think my burden at that point was more for like the specific place I had visited. And I didn't necessarily have the bigger vision for East Asia's peoples as a whole, which is OMF's vision. And so I think at that point, I just was trying to like read more about Asia and learn more about it. And I was reading this book, Revolution in World Missions. I had gotten it for free at some conference sometime, and finally decided to read it. And he was talking about unreached people in Asia, and just talking more about the reality of the lack of access to the gospel. And just reading that book, that was just the Holy Spirit just decided, okay, now you're going to really have a heart for all of East Asia. And that's what happened. I just started feeling deeply, deeply sad that, yeah, East Asians, so many places in East Asia didn't have access to the message of Christ. And so then it did become this bigger burden for just East Asia as a whole. And yeah, it felt like another one of those moments that I didn't plan or have control over, but I just was like bawling thinking about it. And so then I talked to OMF because they had sort of been like, okay, go on your trip and then pray about it, see if you really want to come work with us, because it was a support-based position. So it was going to require like a big commitment to really pursue that position. And so, yeah, I think after I read that and just realized, okay, now I have the burden, I talked to OMF again and was like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to join the team, but I still, it's like, I want to go to Asia. I don't want to be in an office in the US. I want to go over there and talk to people and be among unreached people. And OMF was like, okay, well, since you've just been to Asia for the first time, and maybe let's start with mobilization. Let's start with the role that you actually were initially interested in. So OMF kind of had to recast the vision for me of why mobilization was important. And then I kind of came to my senses and was like, okay, this is an important way to be involved in missions. And this is a really good way for me to contribute. And it's just a good fit for where I was at in life at that point, which was having had experience with writing and not yet much experience overseas. So I think it was a good place for me.
These are two interesting points where obviously your first introduction to OMF is that there is a position here in the States that you could be a part of, but there's also other opportunities where they geared you to doing the short-term trip. Both these opportunities, as you'd mentioned, they're support-based. So let's go back to the first one. You're going to go work on a short-term trip, but you got to raise support and tell people what's going on behind the scenes at home and in your communities, your circle of influences. Were you finding people supportive of this? That's a big step to send, our youth off into these areas that are unexplored in many cases. How was your church community? How was your family? I'm getting ready. I think this is where God's leading me. What do you guys think? And would you support it?
Yeah, I think my church community, I think they were supportive because I had other friends and probably at other points had raised support for missions trips or service trips. I think what I remember was more so my parents' nervousness around this, which they're lovely people, love the Lord, had missionary friends throughout the years who they had supported. I think it felt a bit different, but neither of them had at that point been overseas before. So I think when it came to me going, it was a little more like they were nervous about it and apprehensive, but I think they could see I was passionate about it. They knew it was a good thing to be doing. So they did, in the end, support me, at least for the short-term trip. And then I think it was an additional type of wrestling for them to then support me doing the support my job. Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, it's a weird space that a lot of us exist in, where missions for financial support and partnership support comes to those who are actually going overseas, as well as those who stay on the home front, being in a nonprofit, and certain nonprofits operate in this similar space. So you're saying right now, God's not calling me to go overseas full time. He's calling me to stay in the States full time, but I got to have support and partners behind me to do this. So what was that like?
That was a challenging, I think, step of faith for me. Yeah, because it was a bit intimidating. I had to have 3 years worth of pledges for a stateside role, and I hadn't raised that much support before. And I remember the person who was going to be my boss at the time said, if you do this, you have to so she said, you have to know that you're called. You have to know it because this isn't going to be easy. So you have to have real conviction about it. And so I did, at that time, I did feel conviction around it, but my parents were not thrilled about that being my first step into the career world after college. they were like, can't you like get a normal job to start, because I had student debt, and they just were like, we just don't want this for you. We don't want this like tough path for you. We want you to have some stability and security and start with that. And then later you can do missions. But it's just what I felt really led to. And I wanted to do it. And I just think there was no talking me out of it. And so I got in touch with my aunt and uncle who had been missionaries in Croatia, and sort of chatted with them, and was really talking with them through, it felt strange to me to have my parents. It's not that they weren't supportive of missions, but just they had a lot of hesitation about me doing this. And I wasn't used to them not being totally behind what I was doing. And so it was just really uncomfortable to have my parents questioning my decision. And so I really leaned on my aunt and uncle and was like, is it okay that I'm doing this? And they were totally respectful of my parents, but also tried to, I think, just validate the call that I had felt from the Lord. And so I think they offered some of that. They lent some confidence to me. I think, like, this is okay. You can do this. You can pursue this. And, and my parents did come around, but it was kind of they would say it was really a faith building experience for them, because people also told me, oh, since you're going to be stateside, it's going to be harder for you to raise support. And so I was like, okay, well, we'll see how this goes. But yeah, God really provided. And there were different points where it's like you're raising support, and then you get like stuck at certain percentages. And I remember like I was at 40%, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know how I'm going to make another 60%. It's just felt like, I don't know if I can make it to the end. And then I got kind of over that hump, and then I was at 80%, and I was stuck there. And I was like, I literally have no one else to talk to. But then God just someone reached out who I hadn't even given a presentation to, and just said, hey, how much do you have left to raise? And I said, well, it basically was like $14,000 was essentially the number. And they were like, okay, I'll cover that. And I was like, what? Are you sure? So it was just, things like that.
That's
and
cool.
Yeah. And after the fact, I remember my uncle telling me, he was like, we were really supportive of you doing this, but there were a couple moments where I thought about asking you if you wanted to quit, because he was just concerned for me that I wasn't going to make it. And he just wanted to, I think, spare me the agony of, struggling through the end of my support raising. But he was like, I just saw you were so determined, and you never, you didn't waver in it. And it's like, it's not that I didn't waver, as in it was emotionally difficult to do.
Yeah.
But I think there was just like this anchoring piece that just never left me. And so I was like, there's no other option. Like, this is what God's called me to. And so I'm really thankful that the Lord kind of anchored me in that, because I think people didn't quite express their uncertainty till after the fact. They're like, we weren't sure you were going to make it, but yeah, God provided. And so that was a really faith building journey for me and my parents, and for I think everyone who was walking with me. So grateful for that.
That's so cool. Put in those difficult situations and those challenges. And I have seen over and over, as you just testified, that more often than not, they just grow your faith deeper, because you really do learn what it means to surrender and put your full trust in God and his provision. Even when you're stuck at the 40% or you hit the 80%, it's like, this is going nowhere. Then all of a sudden, some random person from out of nowhere you haven't talked to says, hey, I got you covered. I love those stories. Then you go, oh, you did want me to do this, didn't you, God? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, totally. I knew all along it was going to be fine. So it's,
So you joined. You joined the communications team. What was that like? Those early years. What were you doing?
Well, my role in the team was writer and assistant editor, and so it was learning about really, the kind of the OMF brand. It was, because part of my job was making sure all the communication that went out from OMF from different departments all sounded like it was coming from OMF, and catching typos, putting periods in places, but also getting to work with prayer materials and getting to learn a ton about Asia because
Mm.
the prayer content was coming out of the communications department, and that was one of my main jobs. Really, was to help produce some of that prayer content, editing the prayer guides, working with people who would submit content for. I mean, over time, it ended up being the blog. I don't think we had a blog at the time, but things like the blog and social media pages, but also brochures and just anything that showed up in print or digitally to get the word out about what OMF is doing, about what God's doing in East Asia. So it just required a lot of learning about different countries and interfacing with different workers and US staff, but also internationally, our workers on the field to kind of get insights into what God's doing. So it was really cool to be able to sort of have this breadth of knowledge about East Asia, even though I was only scratching the surface of what there is to know. But I really enjoyed, I think, getting to see and hear so many stories. I mean, that's the thing I feel like was a real privilege of being on the communications team. And it was like my job to know what God was doing in Asia because it was my job to disseminate that information and those stories to fuel prayer. And so that's where I just got to hear so many stories. And that really built my faith. And I think expanded my understanding of how God works and the ways he can work and the ways he uses people. So that was really, really cool to be part of.
Yeah. And you and the team have done such a great job over the years. And while you were in this particular role behind the scenes, are you still thinking, I'm going long term at some point?
Yeah. So reading all these stories, it did two things. I think it kept that fire going and interest in field work, and it really intimidated me at the same time because I was reading these amazing stories and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not equipped for, could I actually do this work? I don't know that I'm actually equipped for this. I had not been to Bible school. It's not like I had brought a ton of people to the Lord before. And, and I'm meeting missionaries. And even though they're very down to earth, lovely people, I still was like, whoa. I did think of them as kind of these special people who had been called by God to do this work. And so I think, and just seeing, yes, both the victories that they had seen, but also the challenges that probably is part of what added to my hesitation was I was getting to see the real nitty gritty parts of real life missionary work, and that it wasn't all glamorous, that it's not like you just share the gospel and people are coming in droves to know the Lord. It's like, I also heard a lot of stories of struggle and difficulty and spiritual battle. And so I think that kind of tempered some of my confidence that like, oh, I could go and do this. I was like, oh, I don't actually know if I can go and do this. So, so I think then it made me feel like, okay, I want to wait till God really calls me and I really know that he wants me specifically to go. So I would just, we'd have so many missionaries coming through the office and I was always asking about their call stories because I was like, how were you called and what did that look like? And people just seemed, a lot of people I talked to, I think they seemed to have like a really clear call or something, or at least to me, it seemed clear. And I was like, gosh, I don't feel like I have that, So I just kept asking for people's stories and was like, oh gosh, I don't know. Will God ever call me? But I was sort of just keeping my eyes open for opportunities. There were a couple times there was an opportunity to like go on a short-term trip to Asia. And I think I went on like maybe a couple trips, but yeah, didn't yet feel that what I thought the call was supposed to feel like. So I sort of just resigned to being like, okay, well, I'm involved in missions, doing what I'm doing. I like it. I guess I'll just stay here doing this until something crazy, until God makes it clear I'm not supposed to be doing this anymore. And then the invitation came unexpectedly. But yeah, I had bought a house in Denver because I was like, all right, I'm going to be here for a while. It seems like I have not been called overseas yet. But even when I was buying my house, I said, Lord, I'm not going to let this be an obstacle. If you call me overseas, like I will get rid of the house. I will do whatever. But like for now, it doesn't look like you're asking me to go anywhere, so I'm just going to settle down. So at that point, I had been working on the communications team for like 7 years. And that same year was the year I went to a friend's wedding. I was in a friend's wedding, and she said, "Oh, there's going to be this groomsman there who he's, a missionary in Cambodia. You guys should totally connect because you're both in missions." I was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And I'm thinking, I've met a million missionaries at this point. I don't need to meet another random missionary in Cambodia, but okay, we'll connect at some point. So, after all the festivities are done, the wedding's over, the reception's over, finally he and I connect. And I'm like, "Oh, hey, I hear you're, in missions in Cambodia." And he was like, "Yeah." And he asked me what I do. And he was like, "Wait, so you love Asia and you're on support. You've already raised support. Why aren't you in Asia?" And I was like, "Well, I haven't been like called yet." He's like, "What do you mean you haven't been called?" He's like, "You love Asia. You have support. Just go. Why can't you just go?" And I was like, "Well, I just bought a house and I just hadn't really felt like God called me yet." And so he starts just challenging me and being like, "What do you mean you haven't been called yet?" And so he's like, "You should just start with Cambodia. Just go to Cambodia." And he had been in Cambodia for maybe a few years at that point. He had married a Khmer woman. And so he was working with an anti-sex trafficking organization. And I was like, "You're just trying to recruit me. You probably do this to everybody." And he's like, "No, I don't very often meet people who love Asia as much as you do and who are like this committed to, being involved in missions." And so after that, we just were emailing back and forth. And it was really just a process of me trying to come up with excuses as to why I had not moved to Asia yet. And he just kept challenging me. And I was realizing like, okay, I guess I don't have great reasons for not exploring this. I was waiting for this like call, but I guess I could just take a step, and explore it. And so that wedding was in like October 2018. And he was like, "How about you come like next month to Cambodia?" And I was like, because I was like, okay, I'll go on a short-term trip I'll start with Cambodia, see how that goes. And I was like, maybe in like a couple years, I'll aim to get there a couple years from now. And he was like, "What are you talking about? Come like now." And again, I was like, "Oh, no, that's too soon. And my boss would have to let me go. And they're not going to let me go because I have all this work to do on the US team. And they're not going to let me just like up and go to Asia for a while." And so anyway, but I talked to my boss about it and was like, "So what do you think about me going to Cambodia?" And I sort of was like trying to come up with something that would sound like it could still be like I could still be doing my job there. So I was like, "What if I went and wrote stories about the Cambodia team and did like a little journalistic trip or whatever?" And she was like, "Sure. Yeah, sounds great." Like, what do you mean?
Wait,
Sounds great.
did you hear what I said?
Like I said, and because I was saying like maybe I could go for a couple months, and she was like, "Well, I mean, you could just like, how about you just like buy a ticket there, and then you just kind of leave it open ended, and you just like come back when you're ready." And I was like, "What are you talking about right now?"
That doesn't make sense.
and so yeah, so then I just was running out of excuses to not go. And part of the reason for the like couple months was I was like, "Okay, I've been to Asia for 6 weeks. Let's see if I could go for a little bit longer." So I ended up going so that January, I ended up leaving for Cambodia and was there for 2 months, traveling around the country, interviewing missionaries, writing stories, writing blog posts, writing some social media content, but just really focusing on Cambodia. And I'm really grateful that my boss, Sue, at the time was like, "Don't worry about all your other responsibilities. Just focus on this," and just delegated all my other work to other people and was just like, "You just focus on this." And I, again, was like, why am I allowed to do this? I don't know. But it was a gift. And that was, yeah, my first time in Cambodia. But just and while I was there, I was trying to think, even while I was there, I had a great experience, but I was asking myself, I was like, "Okay, Megan, could you do this for the next 20 years?" Because in my mind, I'm like, if you're going to be an overseas missionary, like you got to make a 20-year commitment. And every time I thought, for some reason, I picked 20 as the number of years. I don't know why. But when I thought about that, I was like, oof, it's a lot. I don't know. I don't know if I can do 20 years. But then, and then I would be like, okay, well, what about today? Are you enjoying today? And it was like, yes, I love this day. This is amazing. I'm in Cambodia. This is wonderful. And then every time I'd be like, okay, how about a 20-year commitment? I was like, oh gosh, that's a long time. I don't know if I can do 20 years. So it was still baby steps. It was like, okay, we did the 2 months. I loved it. But there was still a lot of wrestling to be had after I got back from that trip to figure out what my next steps after that were going to be. But that was certainly a big step in the right direction for me.
But that was the journey that eventually solidified, this is where I'm supposed to be, right?
Yeah. And that's where it's like, even because I continued to wrestle after that, I think, because I was like, okay, now that I've been and I had a good experience, like now this feeling of being called is just going to just come upon me. And I will just feel, yes, I am called to Cambodia. And I was just waiting for it and praying and waiting for it and praying. And I was like, it's just not coming. I'm just not feeling that, whatever that is that I'm supposed to feel, I'm just not feeling it. And I just had to get to a point where I was like, okay, what if you just take a step, just apply to go and see what happens. And so I finally just was like, I'm tired of I was like, I think God's really opened a door for me here. I think I'm supposed to move towards it, just because I don't feel this like otherworldly sense of call. God's opened a door that I can walk through. So I started the application process, and the further I got into it, the more I started feeling a sense of peace, a conviction, an excitement. And so by the time I actually was accepted and preparing to go, I was like, yes, I want to be in Cambodia long term. And so, but it was sort of a gradual thing for me. It was kind of like taking the next step. And then with each step after that, I grew in confidence and in peace and conviction that it was what God had for me. So it was a little bit of a gradual journey.
It sounds like the call for you, correct me if I'm wrong, was the passion and the constant dwelling of it. Like you're constantly wrestling with it, but there's a passion for it. So it wasn't a verbal call, as some people would say, but it was something that was placed on your heart and your mind that you just couldn't avoid.
Yeah, I think there must be something about when you are immersed in the missions world, and you're hearing people's stories, and then of course you compare your story to everyone else's, and you're like, mine doesn't look like theirs, or I'm not qualified in the way they're qualified, or I'm not gifted in the way they're gifted. And so I think it was part of this, because I'd heard so many people's stories. I was just like, I don't know if mine fits the mold. And I think too, when you're immersed in a missions world, you forget that that sense of passion is like not necessarily normal. Like not everyone feels that, because that's something people have said to me over the years. I just think it's really normal to be excited about East Asia because everyone around me and working for OMF shares the same passion. So it's like, well, what's different about me, But my friends have been like, not everyone thinks this sounds really cool, right? Like not everyone is considering doing this with their lives. You're like, oh, I guess that's true. So I think I just got kind of a little bit lost in not really realizing like this is a very specific thing God's put on your heart, and not everyone has this passion or desire, whatever it is. And so pay attention to it, just like the invitation to pay attention to that, follow it through, see what God does with it. And so, sometimes it's helpful to have other people's perspective on what you're going through, because you get a little myopic, I think, and sort of forget that, oh yeah, God's been doing things and people are noticing
for a while now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
By the way, did you realize that sign that God's put on you and everybody else can see it, but you're not seeing it?
Yeah. Yeah. I've had that conversation multiple times with people. They're like, why are you so confused about this? Like it's very clear. And I'm like, is it though? Are you sure?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Literally it's hanging from you. It's all over you.
Yeah.
So when you finally surrender into that, this is it. This is your future. Going back to family, friends, church community, and you're telling them that. What was that like?
It's funny because I thought it was like such a big announcement that I was going to be preparing to go to Cambodia longer term. And I thought it was like a really big deal. I had finally decided to do this. And everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense. And I was like,
Yeah.
again, well, I was like, what do you mean? I've been wrestling with this decision for so long and I finally made up my mind, And they're like, well, yeah, does that make sense for you? And I'm like, what? Really? So I think it was not really a surprise to other people by the time I committed. Yeah, but it felt like a big deal to me because each step that was like a little bit of a bigger commitment than the step before felt huge to me. So now looking back, I'm like, yeah, it was not a big deal to commit to 2 years in Cambodia, but at the time, that was such a huge step up from what I had committed to before. So each additional step really took a lot of thought and prayer for me. But yeah, I had a lot of support from people. And I mean, of course, people were like, oh my gosh, you're going to be gone. And, the goodbyes are difficult.
Yeah.
But I think people were really supportive at that point. And I'm grateful. I mean, again, my parents, that was another step of faith for them. Each step I was taking was also a step of faith for them because, and a lot of people, I think in my parents' generation, think when they hear Cambodia, they think of the war and maybe like even the wars in that region. And so we're very nervous about it. But I really admire the way that they just took those concerns to the Lord. They didn't put those anxieties or concerns on me or make me responsible for helping them through it. They just were like, we know we need to go to the Lord with this. And I've been really, really proud of them for how they've worked through their anxiety with that. But yeah, they've been really supportive, which is great.
That's beautiful. And so recently you have returned, but to prepare to go back, what have you been doing to prepare for the foreseeable future overseas?
Yeah. So coming up the end of my 2 years, I went as an associate. So, I mean, OMF has all these terms for different lengths of commitment. So the associate is like the midterm commitment, I guess, 2 to 3 years. You're not a member yet. You're in the kind of exploratory term. So that's what I was in last time. And so at the end of that term, I expressed to the Cambodia team that I wanted to come back longer term. And so they said, because I'd want to be a long-term church planter, the standard recommendation was to get some formal Bible training since I hadn't gone to Bible school or done formal Bible training before. So they recommended 2 years, I think is kind of their standard recommendation. And at first I was trying to barter with them to get it down to 1 year. And then I was like, well, I guess if I'm going all the way back to the States, I might as well just really commit to learning as much as I can. So eventually I was like, okay. I'll do 2 years of something. And so found a program through Gordon Conwell. That was a Master's in Global Leadership program that seemed like a good mix of like Bible and theology classes and cross-cultural leadership classes. And it looked like something that was doable to accomplish in 2 years. And so I was like, yeah, that was the program I chose. And I was able to do it online while I was in Denver because I wanted to be around my church community for the 2 years. I didn't really want to uproot myself again because coming back from the field, I was exhausted and I needed connection. I needed support and like emotional support. So I couldn't really stomach the idea of coming back and then moving to a new community in the US for 2 whole years. So my compromise was I'll be based in Denver where I live, but I'll do the program online. So I'm thankful I had that option. And it was a good experience. And I got to gear a lot of my projects towards learning more about Cambodia, because you have different papers and they say, okay, pick a topic or pick a region or whatever. And of course, whenever I had the opportunity, I was like, okay, I'm going to write about something Cambodia related. So it was neat to be able to go through the program with Cambodia specifically in mind as I was learning and just trying to think of, okay, how can I apply these tools to my ministry back there? So I graduated in December of last year, 2024. And yeah, so then I've just started up the process again of with OMF of reapplying to go back, but this time as a member, which means like a 4-year term. And yeah, the biggest commitment level that OMF has for overseas workers thus far that I'm aware of. And so yeah, so stepping up a level in my commitment, but I feel like super ready for it now. I mean, I say super ready for it as in like excited about it, but of course I still feel inadequate a lot of ways and have nervousness about how God, but I think that now I've just seen God, I don't know, show up for me, be there for me, help me. And so I think I'm just like, okay, this is where you're leading me. I have a lot of insecurities and doubts about my own abilities, but you always do something with what I have to offer. And so I'm just going to go and see what he does. And so, yeah, so I have a lot of excitement about it and curiosity about what God will do this term. But yeah.
I think it's more often where God wants us in those positions where we go, I got nothing to offer here. God, you got to do this. You got to show up, because I think we grow deeper in our faith in those moments. Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So why Cambodia?
Great question. I think why Cambodia at first was because someone invited me to go.
Yeah.
I literally was like, okay, this person works in Cambodia. It's an open country. And so it'll be maybe easier to get into because there's not as many security restrictions around it. So I was like, I'm going to start with asking the Cambodia team if I can come. If they say no, I'll move on to a different country. But they said yes. So that's where I went. And I think I've been drawn to, I think probably Southeast Asian countries, in part because I think there have been a lot of wars and there's a lot of poverty. And I think I'm drawn to kind of under-resourced communities that materially are under-resourced. And so Cambodia sort of fit that. And so, yeah, it wasn't a super strategic decision at first, but I think when I went there, I had a really positive experience. The Khmer people were so open and kind. And I think because I had a really good experience there. And then, it's just the history of the country with the genocide and the trauma that people are going through and dealing with. And then just the infrastructure of the country still being rebuilt. I think it's like there's so many opportunities to serve and come alongside Cambodians. And so I think it was just like, why not? Because I liked my experience there. And then I think once I went back, got invested, started learning language, it was just like, well, I'm not going to leave now, because this has become my community. So I think it was just choosing to invest there and then becoming invested in those people in that place. That's just where my heart is now.
Yeah, my actual first experience in Asia was Cambodia.
I didn't know that.
Yes, my wife and I were church planners up in Canada. The group we were with asked me to go overseas to do some training with some locals in Cambodia. Spent a little over a month doing work in Cambodia and Vietnam. Came back. I'd never seen a hunger for the gospel in my entire life as the Khmer and the Vietnamese wanted it. And I was blown away by it. Came back, we started praying, and God unfolded a bunch of stuff. We ended up with OMF and went to Thailand of all places, but Cambodia was it. Cambodia was the place where there was just stuff you read about, a hunger and a desire for truth and Jesus, and then you experience it. And the whole 20-minute message thing is like, no, we're going to be here for hours upon hour, even days, and you're going to be teaching us and leading us. And just that was the beginning of our journey with where God led us into OMF.
Cool.
So beautiful. That's people, awesome. Beautiful place.
Yeah, it is. I think everyone who goes to Cambodia they don't really want to leave. They fall in love with the people and seeing the Cambodian church there. I mean, that I often think of my Cambodian Christian friends when I'm struggling in my faith and starting to like doubt and have a lot of cynicism. I think of their stories and it sort of brings me back to like centers me on like the presence and power of God. And so, yeah, there's definitely just it kind of humbles me and puts me in my place when I hear their stories and see their passion for the Lord and their countercultural decision to follow Christ because it's predominantly Buddhist country. It's woven into the culture, the daily life of everyone there. And so being a Christian is not culturally normal or doesn't really make sense. So they have a lot of just opposition and challenges that it's beautiful to see how their love for God just persists through that. So it's definitely been an inspiration to me walking with them.
No doubt. There is truly a purity to their faith, especially if you go back and you study what's happened in the country amongst their people and the trials and all the things they've been through. When you see believers and their faith and their joy in worshiping God and Jesus, there's something very powerful and extremely beautiful about it.
Yeah.
So, Megan, thank you for sharing your story with us. As you sort of look back over the years of your life from childhood up into where God has you now, are there any sort of lessons or words of wisdom that you would like to leave us with?
I guess when I look back, it feels like just taking the next step seems to be how I've ended up where I am. Just, there's so much I didn't plan for with my journey. And I feel like I've heard that theme in other people's stories too. And I think a lot of times it just came down to the whole big picture is always very intimidating of like, what if God's calling me to this big thing? But I think just taking the next step in front of you maybe is what I've seen. God uses that. Yeah, I don't know. He's just been so kind and generous and even directing me in places I didn't know to go. And so maybe also trusting his timing, because I think, with my journey with OMF, even it took me, I kept wondering if I was missing something because I had this kind of desire to be overseas, but it just wasn't happening. And I couldn't figure out, it's like, is it me? Am I missing something? Am I not listening enough? But I just feel like God opened the door at the right time for me and at a time when I think I was more ready to walk through it. So yeah, I also think people always say it, trust in the Lord's timing. But yeah, just considering that you're not as in control of your journey as you might want to be or think that you are. And so just seeking the Lord with that and not maybe beating yourself up too much or feeling like you're not where you thought you would be at the time you thought you would be there. I've just been really grateful for the Lord's timing and yeah, it usually takes longer than I want, but then it'll just like go really fast. So you just never know. But anyway, I don't know if that's any wisdom, but those are my tidbits.
No, it's true. Everybody's life unfolds in chapters, and everybody's chapters read a little bit differently. But when we get to look back at how God unfolds the story, it's a beautiful thing, because we get to go, oh yeah, a lot of our faith journey, there's similarities, but it doesn't mean that as they unfold in life, they unfolded the same way. So yeah, I love it. I love it. You never know, ladies and gentlemen, if the Holy Spirit's going to show up on a bench outside Walmart or in a prayer service. Who knows? Yeah, God works in mysterious ways, and we're grateful for it. Megan, thank you so much. It's been wonderful hearing how God's story has unfolded in your life, and look forward to what the next chapters in life have for you.
Thanks, Rodney. It was a pleasure to be here and to share. So thank you for listening.
My pleasure.
To learn more about OMF, visit us at omf.org/US.